Good morning, and welcome to this worship service of the Unitarian Universalist Church in Idaho Falls. My name is Cindy Miller, and I'm your worship associate for today. We are meeting both in person and via electronic streaming on YouTube. I welcome you with these words from Kenneth Warren. Come into the company of this congregation, enlightened by reason and moved by concern. Come with open minds and warm hearts. May we here cultivate a confidence that human intelligence and human affection can temper and ultimately overcome cruel circumstances and misguided malice with faith in the power of good over evil. And we welcome you as you are. Unitarian Universalism is a liberal religion with Jewish Christian roots. It has no creed, but rather is guided by 7 principles grounded in the humanistic teachings of the world's religions. It allows us the opportunity to go deeper and with the biggest questions of meaning, purpose, and possibility. The service today is led from our church's sanctuary by our own Reverend Kevin Carson. We thank him for his leadership and his presence. We thank Jessica for her beautiful recorded music. And all of this is made possible by the technology skills of Vic Allen. If you are joining us online, please sign into the chat box, likely on the right side of your screen, or if you're using a smartphone, it might be below your box. This will let us know who's joining us. If you are attending online and you have a joy, concern, or sorrow that you'd like to have shared, please share them now in the chat so they can be shared at the appropriate time during the service. If you're attending in person, there are papers for you to write joys and concerns, and they can be placed in the basket at the back of the sanctuary. Our church, this is our first announcement, the church potluck picnic that was scheduled for today after the service is now rescheduled because of the rain outside for next Sunday, June 19th. So be sure to come then for food, camaraderie. The next announcement, the men's group meets this Friday at Steve Weich's home at 5:30 p.m. For details, you can contact either Steve or Jim Sathi. And due to illness today, there will be no RE today, so the children will be staying with us. And then my last announcement, in this long time of COVID and of virtual meetings, we remind you that the church is entirely supported by its members and friends. We understand this through the words of Victoria Weinstein, the minister of the UU Church of Greater Lynn, Massachusetts. We say in this church that the offering is a sacrament of the free church, and what we mean by that is that we believe it is a blessing to be able to govern ourselves and support our religious community ourselves, to make possible by our generosity everything we dream of and do to live out our shared values. You can make your contributions by mailing a check to the church at Post Office Box 50376 in Idaho Falls, or by clicking on the donate button in the upper right corner of the church's website. Or if you're here in the sanctuary, you can drop your contribution in the basket at the rear of the sanctuary. And now Reverend Kevin has a special announcement.
Kat Reese, can you come up, please? In our congregation, we welcome everyone to join us in worship and any other activities. And you can be a friend of our congregation for many, many years if you choose to be so. And that is the case. I know people have been a friend of a congregation for over 20 years in Rhode Island. So you're not pressured in any way to become a member of the church. But once you've gotten to know us and decided that this is a good fit for you as a community, we welcome you into membership. And to do so, we remind folks that you do need to sign the membership book. I understand there was some confusion a few years ago about if they'd actually signed the book. So this morning, I'm pleased to welcome Kat Reese into membership. She's been attending classes and greeting for several months now, I guess. So it's about time we welcomed her into membership. So I invite her now to join us by signing our book. Yep, June 12th. And if you haven't gotten to know Kat, please introduce yourself and get to know her. Welcome.
Thank you.
That's good.
Thank you.
Okay. So we will ring our peace bowl as the formal start of worship. In the words of the writer Robin Gray, day breaks on our gratitude for family and friends, for the freedom to find our own truth, for the company of those who gather here, and the promise we offer one another. Let the light of day bring the grace of faith into our lives. I'll ring the bowl 3 times, and as I do so, please breathe deeply. Breathe in your gratitude, and breathe out any feelings of separation. Our church covenant was decided upon by our members, and it, along with our 7 Unitarian Universalist principles, is our guide to how we relate to the world and to each other. Please join me and we can read it together. Love is the spirit of this community, and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. Reverend Kevin will now light our chalice as I read these words, adapted from those of Tracy Blinkney. The chalice burns with a flame for those who seek and defend the right to a free and responsible search for truth and meaning, so that each person may live according to his or her or their conscience. May we tend this fire always, ever vigilant and courageous in the struggle for freedom and justice for all.
Good morning. Our call to worship this morning is the poem, I Too Sing America by Langston Hughes. I too sing America. I am the darker brother. They send me to eat in the kitchen when company comes. But I laugh and eat well and grow strong. Tomorrow, I'll be at the table when company comes. Nobody'll dare say to me, eat in the kitchen then. Besides, they'll see how beautiful I am and be ashamed. I, too, am America. I invite you to enjoy our opening hymn, number 121, We'll Build a Land.
So this is the time for all ages, and because of some illness, I'm reading it today, and this is the first time I've seen it, so be a little patient. This is John L. Cashin, that's correct pronunciation. entitled Witness for Justice. One day in Alabama in 1968, as farmers worked in their fields, a small airplane swooped into view. The farmers looked up wonderingly as papers fluttered out of the plane into the sky and came swirling down to earth all around them. The papers were flyers about the upcoming elections. Flyers with a picture of an eagle and the names of the candidates the pilot of the airplane liked the best. That pilot was John L. Cashin. He hoped those farmers would vote for the candidates of the National Democratic Party, a political party he founded to help African Americans run in Alabama's elections. He wanted the farmers and everyone else to know that these candidates, if elected, would use their positions in government to make their life better and more fair for the farmers, their families, and all their neighbors. John Cashin was not only a pilot, he was a dentist too, and a husband, and a father of 3 children. He himself had run for mayor in this town, Huntsville, Alabama. He did not win. Later in life, he would run for the governor of the state of Alabama, and he didn't win that election either. But then again, he had not expected to win. In those days in Alabama, African Americans had little chance of winning public office. Even though about 1/3 of Alabama's people were black, the Alabama state government had elected no officials who were African American. Very few blacks ran for election. Very few blacks could even vote in elections. They were kept away by unfair laws, sometimes called Jim Crow laws, and by threats of violence by white people who did not want their black neighbors to vote. So with little chance to win, why did John Cashin run for mayor and then for governor? Well, John was an activist who understood the power of public witness, and he made a promise when he was 11 years old to do whatever he could to get blacks involved in the political process and to speak against the influences that kept them away. Every time John Cashin put his name on a ballot and his picture on election posters and flyers, he caught the dreams of other African Americans in Alabama. Campaign speeches gave him a chance to make some noise for justice and speak out against laws that were not fair to African Americans. When John Cashin formed the National Democratic Party, he chose as its symbol an eagle, the well-known symbol of American freedom. With eagles printed all over their flyers and signs and posters, the National Democratic Party made sure even blacks who could not read could vote for justice-loving candidates, the ones with the eagles by their names. Soon, African Americans in Alabama were running for sheriff, for city councils and judgeships, for the National Democratic Party helped to get many elected. Cashin did not have to witness alone. His family, his Unitarian Universalist congregation in Huntsville, Alabama, and many other UUs and friends joined him. They came to his rallies, made their own speeches to support him, and helped him raise money to fund his elections. Like John, they believed that to witness against the wrongs committed against African Americans was an important way to show their faith. Over time in Alabama, more African Americans voted. More African Americans ran for public office and won. As more African Americans became part of the Democratic and Republican parties, John Cashin's National Democratic Party was less important for public witness, and it was dissolved. John Cashin died in 2011. We can be a new generation witnessing for justice. Every time we speak up against a wrong or support people to speak up for themselves, we are part of John Cashin's legacy. He witnessed for the justice he wanted to see in his community and in our nation, an America where everyone's vote counted. And I think that's it. We're not singing our children out because they're not going anywhere. And so we'll just move on to joys and concerns. Okay. For years, the sharing of joys and concerns and sorrows has been our enduring ritual. It is a time where each of us has an opportunity to share major events in our lives so we can all be uplifted by this Unitarian Universalist community. Reverend Kevin will light a candle as each of the joys, concerns, or sorrows are read. Thank you. Any more? Okay. So this is from Kat. It's a joy. My 17th wedding anniversary was yesterday, and my daughter Kelsey turns 11 on the 14th. Okay. From Bill Cohn, a joy and a concern. Victoria having knee replacements next month, but that she will be here this summer. So I guess the first part is the concern, the second part's the joy, right? Okay. Are there any from the chat, Vic? No. Okay, I have one of ours. So in a say his name sort of way, during Pride Month, Bill and I ask for your remembrance of our friend John Wilton Massey, who grew up with our sons, and we considered him part of our family. He was a gay man who committed suicide in 2020. And we ask that any of you whose lives intersect with John and the community John belongs to, embrace them as family when their own families cannot do that.
I have an appreciation for the person in Coeur d'Alene who noticed that there were some armed men ready to do great damage in a pride parade, and they were stopped.
Yeah, 31 went to jail.
Yeah, 31. So thank you to whomever that is.
And Reverend Kevin will light a candle for those joys and concerns we keep in our hearts.
I have two readings from Scripture this morning. The first comes from the Hebrew Scriptures, from the book of Isaiah. Is not this the fast that I choose, to loose the bonds of injustice, to undo the thongs of the yoke, to let the oppressed go free, and to break every yoke? Is it not to share your bread with the hungry, and bring the homeless poor into your house? When you see the naked, to cover them, and not to hide yourself from your own kin. Then your light shall break forth like the dawn, and your healing shall spring up quickly. Your vindicator shall go before you. The glory of the Lord shall be your rear guard. Then you shall call, and the Lord will answer. You shall cry for help, and he will say, Here I am. And the second reading is from the Gospel of Matthew. Then the king will say to those at his right hand, Come, you that are blessed by my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world. For I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me something to drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. I was naked, and you gave me clothing. I was sick, and you took care of me. I was in prison, and you visited me. Then the righteous will answer him, Lord, when was it that we saw you hungry and gave you food, or thirsty and gave you something to drink? And when was it that we saw you a stranger and welcomed you, or naked and gave you clothing? And when was it that we saw you sick or in prison and visited you? And the king will answer them, Truly I tell you, just as you did it to one of the least of these who are members of my family, you did it to me. If you visit the Jefferson Memorial in Washington, D.C., and look up at the rotunda, you will see an inscription carved in the stone that says, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." It was a quote from a letter Jefferson wrote to Dr. Benjamin Rush on September 23, 1800. Like many of our nation's founding fathers, Rush was a truly brilliant and remarkable individual with many talents and interests. Not only was Rush the most famous physician in America in those days, and considered to be the father of American psychiatry, he was also a signer of the Declaration of Independence as a delegate from Philadelphia, and he was an important figure in organizing the Universalist Church of America. Jefferson's letter to Rush was a response to a question of whether Jefferson favored an establishment of some form of Christianity as the official religion of the young United States. At the time, a lot of people favored the idea, particularly members of Episcopal and Congregationalist clergy. And establishment had been the standard practice in the former colonies and in European monarchies. But America already had become a nation of diverse beliefs, with a rich variety of Christian sects and several notable synagogues, and many people having no affiliation with organized religion, especially among the frontier settlements. Choosing one national religion would be difficult, to say the least, since, as Jefferson states in the letter, every sect believes its own form, the true one. Jefferson reassured Rush that he would oppose any attempts in creating an official religion, ending the letter with the now famous quote, "I have sworn upon the altar of God eternal hostility against every form of tyranny over the mind of man." For Jefferson, the idea that one religious sect, or any religion at all for that matter, would be favored above the others was nothing short of tyranny. It would be an abuse of state power and contrary to the democratic ideals of the young nation. In another letter to the Danbury Baptist Association in Connecticut, dated January 1st, 1802, Jefferson was even more explicit, writing, "Believing with you that religion is a matter which lies solely between man and his God, that he owes account to none other than for his faith or his worship, that the legitimate powers of government reach actions only and not opinions, I contemplate with sovereign reverence that act of the whole American people, which declared that their legislature should make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, thus building a wall of separation between church and state." The Establishment Clause he quoted from the United States Constitution, together with that famous phrase, "a wall of separation between church and state," has become the legal standard for judging the boundary between religion and government ever since. But it is a boundary that is frequently challenged and sometimes even breached. It is common for people to become convinced of the righteousness of a moral idea and decide that it would be better for the nation if it were to carry the power of law. With the benefit of hindsight, it is easy for us to see something like slavery, for example, as a moral outrage that needed to be legally abolished. But there were plenty of people who supported it at the time, and many ministers throughout America who preached on the biblical foundations that they believed justified slavery until it was finally ended by the Civil War. The issues can be very complicated and pit the religious beliefs of one group against those of another. This has certainly been the case with women's reproductive choice and marriage equality in our own times. There are passionate religious people on both sides of these issues. And even as I speak, there are lawsuits winding their way through the layers of our justice system. Some states are trying to chip away at the implementation of marriage equality by challenging the right to equal benefits and services. In other places, so-called freedom of religion bills are showing up with the alleged intention of protecting the rights of people to practice their own religion by exempting employers from having to offer birth control in their insurance plans or withholding services to those with whom they do not want to associate. But for other Americans, such as us, it is clear that such laws are simply designed to allow discrimination against women and members of the LGBTQ plus community. And of course, from the leaked draft from the Supreme Court, it seems likely that Roe v. Wade will be overturned this summer, and a chaotic revocation of safe legal abortions will flood the states, resulting in a woman's rights varying depending upon the zip code of her residence. And if that is the case, it won't be long until other rights, such as marriage equality, are challenged on similar legal grounds. At other times, the boundary between church and state is challenged in a way that provides a clear glimpse of the potential tyranny of government intrusion that Jefferson swore to oppose. In 2004, for example, the controller of the state of Texas wanted to revoke the tax-exempt status of the Unitarian Universalist Association. Despite our centuries of history, her stated reasoning was that Unitarians, quote, do not have one system of belief. This is true in a conventional sense, of course, but her definition of what constituted a, quote, real religion was narrowly defined by her personal bias. In truth, I suspect her animosity toward us probably had more to do with the values we stand for, and more specifically, how we tended to vote. And in recent years, in the aftermath of so many terrorist attacks around the world, it's common to hear Islam criticized for not being a, quote, real religion. This is the voice of fear and not rationality. Using such a broad brush to denigrate Muslims would be like saying Christianity is not a real religion based on the example of the Ku Klux Klan or some other Christian nationalist fringe group. There is very little true religion in the heart of such violent extremist organizations, no matter what they proclaim. The idea of government declaring whose beliefs are valid and whose are not is, quite frankly, frightening. You can almost hear Thomas Jefferson and Benjamin Rush spinning in their graves. When the church-state boundary is being challenged, you often hear the argument that America is a, quote, Christian nation, and always has been, but this is surely a debatable point. There is no denying that Christianity is the dominant religion in the West, and certainly it is the case in America. But our founding fathers had no intention of creating some kind of theocracy. Their own religious views ran a broad spectrum from traditional to radical, and they recognized diversity as a strength in our new nation. It was not surprising that E pluribus unum, out of many one, was chosen as our national motto. When you consider how dysfunctional our government can be these days, I am in awe that 13 very different colonies could even form a nation in the first place. That Anglicans, Baptists, Congregationalists, Catholics, Jews, Quakers, Methodists, Unitarians, Universalists, atheists, slave owners, and abolitionists, those who favored strong central government and those who enshrined states' rights, could come together and reach agreement. Clearly, it can be done if we have the political will. What we often ignore is the idea of the common good. Too often we can't get beyond our differences and self-interest. And this makes it easy for those who are motivated by greed or the lust for power to cloud and paralyze our political system. Throughout our nation's history, there have been times when it became essential for people of faith to stand up for what is right and speak truth to power. In the Judeo-Christian tradition, that is the ancestral roots of our Unitarian Universalist faith, this idea reaches all the way back to the Hebrew prophets and continues through the radical teachings of Jesus. It is evident in both our readings this morning. And as Unitarian Universalists, we draw from many other spiritual sources that offer their own teachings on morality, justice, and compassion. There are times when ministers and the people in the pews need to tap into those spiritual roots and speak up and confront moral issues head on, even if it makes some people feel uncomfortable. Ministers are encouraged to cultivate a so-called non-anxious presence for most of the work we do, to be calm and fully present for those whom we serve. But I believe there are times when the anxious presence of a minister becomes its own kind of witness. In uncertain times when there is a need to fight for justice and to defend the most vulnerable in society, to deny feelings of fear and anxiety would be insincere. Just 2 days ago, for example, I read a disturbing article in the East Idaho News website titled, "Ahead of Pride Month, Idaho pastor says LGBTQ people deserve death penalty." Reading about the spew coming from a so-called pastor sowing hate in the Boise area, I can't help but get anxious and angry. As the article points out, this may be an extreme example, but anti-LGBTQ feelings in general continue to run deep in Idaho. And some recent legislation, and what we saw in the news yesterday, has proven this to be true. It is hard to become what Reverend William Barber calls the moral defibrillators of our time, to shock the heart of America back into a healthy rhythm, unless you first acknowledge that America's heart is in trouble. It is good to see clergy stepping up to confront the issues we face, but really, it is up to all of us. Acknowledging the world's pain can be a path to begin the healing. It may even help us to begin to make a place for more joy in our lives or others, like I talked about last Sunday. But we may have to cross an ocean of despair before we can get to that place. I think back to how I felt almost a decade ago, just before Christmas, when we heard the shocking news from Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut, when in an instant the joy of the holiday season turned to despair. I did not know anyone personally who suffered a loss that day. I could only empathize with their pain and heartache and join in their sorrow. I think about how somber that time was and how I prayed that out of that tragedy, our country might finally do something to reduce gun violence, and how hopeless I felt when we did nothing once again. I remember how I hoped that the families of the slain could find some comfort in their faith or from wherever it might come. And my visceral anger whenever I heard someone suggest it was simply, quote, God's will, or that there was no way we could have prevented the tragedy. And here we are again. I hope this time it will be different. It was heartening yesterday to see all the marches and rallies supporting the long overdue reform of gun laws. And it was especially moving to see clergy and young people, many of whom experienced the violence directly, bearing witness. There are rules against ministers and churches endorsing candidates or specific political campaigns for very good reasons, though these are often stretched beyond the limit. But that doesn't mean we must remain silent. Governments make moral decisions all the time, and we must remain vigilant. Every budget is a moral document that decides who should be helped and who should be ignored. Issues like access to health care, equal pay, and a living wage are moral choices. And if we are to remain true to our faith and do right by the least of these, we have decisions to make. The challenge for all of us is to rise above political ideology and lead on moral grounds. As the Reverend Jim Wallace says, don't go right, don't go left, go deeper. The common good is about much more than partisan politics. And there are many ways to go deeper. This congregation has chosen, for example, to make a public display in support of Black Lives Matter and to bear witness to women's reproductive rights, and has long been a supporter of the LGBTQ+ community. Many congregations write letters for Amnesty International on behalf of political prisoners, and occasionally it results in freedom. You can donate to one of the countless organizations fighting the good fight on any issue you can imagine. Speaking truth to power doesn't always mean we have to march in the streets. But sometimes this is the witness we are called to do. I have marched with thousands of others for voting rights in North Carolina and for action on climate change in Providence, Rhode Island, Washington, D.C., and New York. My fellow marchers were people from all walks of life and from different ethnic, cultural, and economic backgrounds, representing a variety of special interests. There were groups that sometimes appeared to have little in common until they came together and realized our common humanity. I've been especially heartened by the ecumenical presence of so many clergy in these marches. I will never forget seeing a rabbi carrying the Torah scrolls on his shoulder when I marched in Reverend William Barber's Moral Mondays movement in Raleigh, North Carolina. Like an Old Testament prophet, his message was that the Word of God itself was calling out the unjust rulers to repent. It was one of the most poignant examples of public witness I've ever seen. All the great justice movements in American history have been driven by what I call a spiritual engine. They were led and powered by people of faith who believed in taking action aligned with their principles. I believe our founding fathers would be very proud to see how far we have come, but I think they would be disappointed to see us still fighting familiar fights and hurling insults back and forth. During the election of 1800, for example, the Federalists who supported John Adams denounced Jefferson as being un-American in often vicious language, and his religious views were a common target, despite the fact that both he and Adams held similar Unitarian beliefs. Although Jefferson belonged to an Anglican church in Virginia, it was well known that he had rationalist Enlightenment views about religion and leaned more toward deism and Unitarianism. He was accused of being an atheist, a Jew, and even a Muslim. Some things haven't changed very much, have they? So brace yourselves for this summer and beyond. As our nation celebrates its 246th birthday next month, we will begin to face a host of challenges that will test our resolve on top of the issues with which we are already engaged. It is my hope that Americans can begin to reclaim the neglected common good, and that people of faith will learn how spiritually empowered moral leadership can work in a diverse society for everyone's benefit. We should always respect that wall of separation between church and state, but it should never become a wall to hide behind in order to shirk our moral duty. If we can only practice what we preach and stand up for our principles and values, we can help begin the healing that our nation so desperately needs. May it be so. I invite you to enjoy our closing hymn, number 108, My Life Flows On in Endless Song.
My life flows on in endless song, above earth's lamentation. I hear the real, the far-off hymn that hails a new creation. tempest round me roars, I know the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close, songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love prevails in heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing? When tyrants tremble as they hear the bells of freedom ringing, when friends rejoice both far and near, how can I keep from singing? To prison cell and dungeon vile, our thoughts to them are winging. When friends by shame are undefiled, how can I keep from singing?
Our closing words are from the book The Third Reconstruction by Reverend William J. Barber II. We had risked the reputation of our moral movement by choosing to escalate our struggle through civil disobedience, and the increased intensity had stretched us as a coalition. But we were learning together that the old organizer's playbook doesn't always have the answer we need for a new moment. Saul Alinsky and his community organizing tradition had shown us the importance of building power and only tackling winnable issues. His power analysis was crucial as we considered tactics and timing. But the moral power of standing by that which is good and right could not always be easily calculated beforehand. We hadn't known how long it would take to win on public education, but we had known we were right. So we had pressed forward. Sometimes we were learning we had to hold hands and walk forward into the darkness, even when we didn't know what the next step would bring. Walking by faith wasn't easy, but it was taking us places where the rules of organizing had not allowed us to go. No one knew just what we were becoming, but we knew one thing for sure: there was no turning back.
So please join me now as Reverend Kevin extinguishes the chalice for today. We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we are together again. The chalice is now extinguished, but its light lives on in the hearts and minds and souls of each one of us. And please now enjoy our postlude. Nobody knows the trouble I've seen.
Thank